I'm Gary Sutton. WSBA News Time is 8:10. Well, one of the big things that has happened this week, the big news story out there, and it's going to continue today with the so-called kiss-in today at Chick-Fil-A, where many rallied this week. Dan Cathy came out and said he was in favor of traditional marriage. He's been also known to support various groups that are opposed to gay marriage. And many people thought he was a bigot, something like that, or homophobic for taking this stand. Many turned out this week at his Chick-fil-A places to protest and stand up for his right to say what he wants to say. And one of the things that came out of this all week long was, how do we discuss? How do we debate? How do we get at each other in this country in terms of talking and yet at the same time remain friends afterward? A guy this morning who I think has demonstrated that time and time again is a man for whom I have a lot of respect. Joe Sestak is a former congressman and admiral. He also ran against Pat Toomey for a Senate seat, and he's with us here on New York's Morning News, and I'm proud to call him friend as well. Good morning, Joe. How you doing?
Good morning, Gary. Thanks for having me on in this day.
Yeah, well, you know, I was thinking about this the other day, and I was talking to someone at dinner the other night, and we were talking about, can't we have a discussion anymore? Can't we express a point of view that maybe isn't popular with other people, and yet at the same time doesn't mean that we hate other people? It just simply means that it is what it is. And I don't care what side of the coin this is on, right? Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, whatever it might be. Have we become so polarized in this country that we can't do this anymore? Because if we can't do this, it seems to me we're not going to get a lot done going forward.
No, you're absolutely right. If there's anything I learned in the Navy is you can have a great difference of opinion, but if you don't come together at the end, the common mission isn't going to work. And here in Pennsylvania, it's the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And for America, it is. It is about us, Americans as a nation. And I've really been, quite frankly, taken with the political process when I was in there. I think it's wonderful to have this ferocious debate of ideas, but when that degrades into attacking the other side's character, and you've seen it in the presidential election, when the Democrats were accusing Mr. Romney of basically committing a felony, they said, with his reports to the FCC. And you saw it from the Republicans to the Democrats when they were saying Obama's running the most dishonest campaign. Wait a minute. Let's talk about whether they have worked on the economic issues well enough the last few years, or let's worry about what Mr. Romney's way in the future is going to be correct. Look, I don't mind the harshness of the debates at times, because it's always going to be a certain element that wants to bring out things about the other person. For example, during the Jefferson-Hamilton debate, so whether it was Adams and Jackson. But today, we have moved too far, too broad a swath of Americans that are divided, that somebody, sometime, has got to begin to emerge to say, you may not always agree with me, but you can trust what I say, and I respect your opinion. And I think that person's going to make a real difference, whoever he or she tends to be in the future. You know,
you hit on something I think is really important, Joe, and it's this. That we need to be able to sit down and talk about things in a win-win way instead of win-loss. And I realize that's become very idealistic, and I'm sorry to say that because it should be the reality. But, you know, the idea of win-win, you were talking about maybe having a difference of opinion on your ship or on your fleet. Well, guess what? If you're not thinking win-win, we got a problem. Because if you have an argument and someone's thinking, well, you got to win and I got to lose, or I've got to win and you got to lose, the ship doesn't go the right place or it doesn't get going at all, you got a big problem on your hands. Well, the ship of state moves the same way. It's not going to move at all if we don't have the kind of debate in this country that says, okay, at the end, how do we all win in this situation? And I think we've missed out on that big time.
Absolutely. Look, Americans are right to feel very uneasy about the future when they have had leaders in both parties, and I would argue from Wall Street leadership to Union National leadership, that tend to forget they're about the working family. Sure, they're supposed to make money, but when LIBOR, rate is being rigged by lies of 18 major banks, many in America, that yours and our mortgages, yours and our credit cards is dependent upon, but they did it for profit, you tend to lose trust in the leadership and what they have to say. But when I went to Congress, I found people take advantage of that.
Yeah.
I walked into the Republican cloakroom just off the floor about 2 months after I'd become a congressman to go in and see Duncan Hunter, who was the Republican ranking member on the House Armed Services Committee. man, I walked in. I was just from the Navy. It was like going into the chief's mess or something. I just wanted to work out an issue with him. Every head stood up because I didn't know that a Democrat wasn't allowed to walk into the Republican cloakroom. And the same, I never saw a Republican walk into the Democratic cloakroom. And so who suffers? We do back here because of what you just said. It's not just that I got to win. The other side has to lose and lose big. And so it's, okay, if you're the majority party, you should have a win, but the other side should have at least somewhat of a win in the legislation you do. Why? Because it's like a bank. If a bank fails, all banks have a run on them because people get worried about the banking industry going down. And so if everybody's always making the other bank lose or always making the other party lose, there's going to be a run on the credibility of our leaders. And that's what's happened. It's I win, you lose, instead of, hey, I'd like a big win, but we'll have a somewhat of a win-win here for America.
You know what's a problem, too, Joe? And again, you alluded to this a moment ago. Authentic discussion today. People are yearning for that. I don't even, and I'm going to offer this as an opinion because I don't have any kind of evidence to really back it up, but just a sense. People don't really care where the ideas come from as long as they're good ideas, because we've gotten to a point with our conversation in this country where we say, okay, Democrats, liberals, Republicans, conservatives. Good, bad, the whole thing has gotten so stratified. It's amazing. And the sense today is, give us something that we can discuss. Tell us that you understand it. Explain it to us in a way that we know you're behind it. And we're going to listen to you. And one of the things that I've always been impressed by, I don't mean to sound patronizing because I'm not that way, but during our fiercest arguments with you, during the time you were running against Pat Toomey and so forth, and we made some national news together, unfortunately, but, during those times, and I think I told you this at the end of the race, you stood up and said what you believed, and you didn't care that people disagreed with you or agreed with you. But at the same time, I found you also willing to listen to other arguments, even though we debate, even though we may end up disagreeing. At the end of it, I thought we could always walk away with respect and feel pretty good about the fact that we had an honest debate and we were coming from honest places. And today, it seems like we have to check in on our agenda first, or what group we're a part of, before we actually go in and have that honest debate anymore. And it seems to me that ought to be the first thing that we're doing.
Absolutely. And as a consequence, the nation is becoming more red and more blue, and people are going to their respective end zones of the football field and aren't even talking together. Look, we had major debates, for example, whether it was immigration or health care,
right,
as I was running. And I can remember the Tea Party. And I always said, look, I respect the Tea Party because I'm running with them. I'm against the establishment. I think something's wrong. But I had a disagreement with the Tea Party. But I'll tell you, I ran those healthcare town halls, and I loved it. They would come in, but before they did, I shook their hands of everybody who was coming in, and I got there an hour before the town hall. Now, they still got upset at me and got pretty darn ticked off. But at my last town hall, just during about a month before the election was over, they asked in Delaware County, here where I live, to have a photograph with me. That's minor, and I got it. But I got to tell you, if you aren't listening in the Navy to your sailors, doesn't mean you always have to agree.
Right.
But if you aren't listening, you aren't going to hear probably some decent ideas, or at least you're not going to have an understanding that they're upset about something. Let's get to it and see if we can have a principled compromise. Look, I'm not just saying these words. I really, truly believe, and I've said this time and again, that you want to have a debate of ideas. That's what we are about in America. Right. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a principled compromise, not a compromise in your principles, but working with the other side, whether it's immigration, health care, whether it's this drought that's clobbering America today, whether it's making sure we're ready to handle Europe going into a recession, we, the American people, suffer. And I love the debates of ideas with you, but at the end of the day, okay, you did have a point there on that Arizona law down on immigration.
And it is okay to say, if you're a Republican, Joe Sestak had a really great idea today. Not as some part of a campaign, but just saying, hey, Joe Sestak had the best idea today. Why aren't we considering that? That would be so refreshing. Or to have the Democrats say, man, I heard a great idea today from Todd Platts, and I think that, geez, we ought to be incorporating that into our thing. Instead, we have this whole thing now where it's, oh, they're Republican? Well, we're not going to include that. Or they're a Democrat? We're not going to include that. I remember when you were talking, and a lot of your colleagues were running for the hills on health care. They didn't want to have anything to do with it at the end of the election. And you were still standing out there saying, I think we ought to include a public option. Now, you and I disagreed on that, but I was so impressed by the fact that you were telling people we still should have a public option. We should be doing more. I'm standing there alone right now, basically telling people this is what I believe in, and you gave reasons why. And while we disagreed, and one of the reasons we still talk today, I was so much in respect of you for doing that. I felt that was really part of what we were talking about here, that we could have that kind of debate over things that you were still willing to stand for when others were kind of stepping away because of other agendas.
But the reason why I was for it wasn't because of the idea itself. It's because I saw that 166 Pennsylvanians were losing their health care every day. That's the equivalent by next February of everybody who lives in New York.
Right.
And so I said, we got to do something about it. Now, my idea may not have been the best. For example, during the debate, I really became supportive of the Republican idea that, one of the ways we should help get this competition better, that people have better choices on their health care plan, is to take down the state barriers we have.
Amen.
That you got to buy health care only amongst yourself. Now, I'd like to make sure that some health care company in Alabama isn't lowballing it so much that and it doesn't have certain standards on it. But nonetheless, I think there could have been a principal compromise by my party with the Republicans to say, that's a good idea. Why don't we include it? But I'll tell you this. People were not included in that debate down there who had different ideas and where certain people wanted to go. Look, at the end of the day, people are supposed to be representatives first, not congressmen or women first, representing the people. Now, everybody isn't going to agree on any issue, but if you aren't out there listening, and that's what I found also in the Navy. Sometimes the crew didn't always want to agree with you. They just want to know if they were at least listened to. And, given due process in the representatives or the captain's mind that, he listened to us at least, and he didn't just look at us. He actually thought it through and came back, why or why not. He felt this is the way to go. We need a lot more than this, and unfortunately, this presidential race has devolved up to now into exactly heightening the unease of Americans on the right, getting further on the right, further on the left, rather than saying, I'm willing to come into the 30 to 30-yard line area at times and work together.
Joe, when you look at this whole Chick-Fil-A controversy this last week, you have a guy here, Dan Cathy, who closes his establishment on Sundays. He doesn't open it on Sundays because he thinks people ought to be at church or whatever. His right to do so as a private businessman, obviously. He comes out and he says, I'm in favor of the traditional form of marriage. And I think that we're on the wrong track by not doing that. And yet, he doesn't have people at the door saying, if you're homosexual, you can't come into my establishment. He doesn't have any of that kind of thing. Never said that he hated homosexuals or anything like that. And yet, that whole group comes out and gets upset with them. And then we got a whole group coming out this week that jumps out and says, oh, we're for him and for, his right to say that and so forth. Today you're going to have a kiss-in. What do you make of this? Because I think this really begs what we're talking about this morning. It begs the ability in America to say, listen, what you're saying may not be popular, just like what I said or what you said from time to time wasn't popular, and yet I can debate that with you and not hate you and not walk away and say, Joe, I never want to talk to you again. And as I said, we had some pretty hot and heavy debates, and yet I think remained friends and remained people that can debate and talk on the air since you ran. And I know we've got a great deal of respect for you. I've had people who would write in every now and then and say, if you have him on again, I'm not going to listen to your show anymore. Well, I ignored that because I thought that was really intolerant. I thought that was an example of exactly what we're talking about this morning. And I said, how many people can you find who are principled, who really believe in what they want to talk about and are willing to debate? And I found you to be exactly that kind of person.
Well, let me, when the head of the Chick-Fil-A came out and said that, I think people tended to forget the President of the United States until just a few months ago was against
Good point.
gay marriage.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, mainly Democrat mayors seem to say, wait a minute, you're not welcomed here. Wait a minute. This is a man's individual opinion. Now, I may not agree with him, but you know what? He has the absolute right to that opinion, because I think you mentioned the word faith. You know, when I ran because in the primary against Senator Specter, I couldn't go into major Democratic areas because the chairperson wouldn't let me come in and talk to the committee members. So I started going to a heck of a lot of churches and other types of congregations, and I came to understand this wonderful fabric of faith that runs through America's cloth. And you know what? People have certain beliefs, and they don't mean them to be prejudicial. It's just his belief. And to begin to say that a product of a company needs to be associated with the opinion of the leader, I think is wrong. Now, it wasn't racist. It wasn't hate. It just was his opinion, because they have a fine, as you mentioned, equal opportunity employment policy there. Now, I step back then and say this, and I want to throw this out on this idea, is I think Citizens United, where it let corporations be equal to people as far as contributions to give it, is going to just help accelerate some of this cultural war, because all of a sudden, if J.C. Penney or IBM has their CEO then throwing millions of dollars on his or her decision, the CEO's decision, into the debate, people are going to say, well, wait a minute, I don't mind your personal opinion, or you want to give your personal money, but all of a sudden J.C. Penney is throwing money into this issue on gay marriage. I don't think I'm going to associate you with the other side, and then you get more protest and all. That's why I think this should be about people and their personal opinion, not about the product that a corporation produces.
Final minute here, Joe. What would you tell people out there in our daily discussion about anything? And we've got a lot about politics now, the economy, our health care, where we're going economically. I mean, what would you tell people to maybe as some final thoughts here this morning?
The final thought I would have is this, and again, I hate to reach back to that wonderful time of the 30 years I was in the military, but gosh, did I learn that at times we reflected the best of America's character, because they were all Americans there. I found that there is always a balance that has to be brought together. And this principal compromise we say, we love rugged individualism. We're about those individual rights. I watched, as I said before, SEAL Team 6 when they did what they did. Man,
Absolutely.
If you've never met a SEAL, you've never met a more rugged individual who wanted to be the best. But we always balanced or aligned that with the common mission, the commonwealth, the common good. And at times, one party seems to go way to the right on, it's all about individualism. The other party seems to go all the way to the right, it's all about the common good and all. No. There's a fine balance that we have between the two. We want individuals to achieve all they can, but we also understand that at times they do need some coming together. Sometimes that's in the form of revenues to make sure roads are built at all. But at times when you don't have leaders, though, who are accountable for those programs, who are willing to say, hey, hold me accountable for my responsibility. These are the benchmarks, and if I don't achieve them, I don't belong here. That's what's missing, and so therefore you have the groups going into those two corners of the boxing ring, rather than being brought together to do a good spar of ideas, but not to where you want to annihilate the other side, because the leadership is not one that wants to be accountable for saying, I'm willing to listen to the other side, see if we can do a principle compromise. I'm not going to compromise my principles, but I understand there's a balance here that has to bring Americans together. And that's where I feel. Otherwise, we just go into our respective corners of the ring, and America suffers because we're not out there engaged together.
Well, we try to slap each other down constantly. Joe, I always appreciate your point of view. Thank you so much this morning for joining us. It's a really, really a great day.
Great, glad to be here. I'll be out in your area nearby in Hershey next weekend, as I mentioned. Looking forward to it with my daughter. Take care.
Check you out in the roller coaster, right?
Yep.
Thanks, Joe. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Joe Sestak with us on York's Morning News. And again, you can agree, disagree with opinions that people have, but you can respect the fact that they actually have a reason for what they believe.